The title of this particular section today is called Symbolic Augers. And I think most of us are familiar with the tool, the auger. The auger is a drill, and it is meant to penetrate through a surface, creating a hole, literally. The term in English comes from the old Latin. And in the classical Latin, auger didn't mean a drill at all. An augur meant someone who interprets the omens. And in the classical art of divination, they separated into a pair the process of divination. Those who could read the omen were of one kind. Those who could interpret the omen were of a different kind. They were the augurs. Now it seems to us at first a very peculiar thing. Why should divination in the classic world be divided like this? The key to understanding that particular question is to understand that the word divide is defined by us subconsciously in a prejudicial way that forbids us to understand the wisdom of the decision. Because the term is not divide, but paired. Divination was a paired process. And those who could see the omen were those who classically, and by classically I mean for about 2,000 years, were portrayed with wide open eyes. And the symbol for that wide open-eyed quality of ourselves was the Owl of Athena. One of the earliest images of wisdom man that we have comes from ancient Sumeria. And you'll see it reproduced wherever Sumeria is mentioned in history books or books on Sumeria. About 3000 BC. It's a man, slightly balding, standing upright. His robe has large floral designs on it. Obviously, he is not a working man. But the size of his eyes are out of proportion to his face. He has enormous owl-like eyes, and they look straight ahead because they are not looking to see something in this world. They are seeing the inner world. That transcendent vision quality where one is no longer seeing this world, but is seeing the inner world. So that those who saw the omen in divination, to correctly see the omen, could not see this world. And so the augurs were separate people, a separate person, because those who saw the omen could not see this world. And the augurs must be able to see this world, because the interpretation of what is seen must be applied. Now, there are many things that could be said here, but in order to carry the lecture today, the presentation, I'm going to just let that be and then carry it on from there by introducing two terms which are paired just like the divination process in antiquity. The process of seeing the omen is an integration process, but the methodology, the technique, the application of interpretation is a different process. It is not integration. It does not occur at all in the ecology of integration. It occurs in a different ecology, an ecology, the term for which we use from modern mathematics, because it goes with integration. The second term is differentiation. Differentiation. The ancient art of divination, the art of divination was a hermetic art, like alchemy was an art. Person making is an art. Art is a differential process and does not occur at all in the ecology of integration. And so our education has two cycles which must be kept distinct but not divided. Distinct but not divided. And that first process is integration, and the second process is differentiation. And just as a simple rule of thumb, if you look at any high school calculus text, you will see that there's an integral calculus and a differential calculus. That mathematics on the higher level, not arithmetic, not arithmetical, on the level of arithmetic numeracy, lines itself up to cardinal sequencing, to serial linearity. But in the higher ordinal powers of mathematics, in calculus and beyond, one deals with integration and differentiation as two hands. They go together like two hands. And when we put the two hands together in higher math, whatever symbolic language we are able to speak in that complementarity, integral differential wholeness, that language can be seen to be real and at the same time applied to this world and be made manifest. I think in our time, in our lifetime, for those of us born before the atomic bomb, we can remember when it was a very moot question whether or not there could be an atomic fission explosion. I can remember as a little boy asking my mother, what is a atomic explosion? What is fission? Having heard the words on a radio newscast, H.V. Kaltenborn, I can still hear his voice, saying that if the atom was split and nuclear forces were released, what would stop the splitting of atoms? There would be no stopping place, and perhaps the entire world would be destroyed. Perhaps the entire atmosphere of the planet. And this was a very real concern. 1943. Very real concern. Because no one, except just a handful of men, either at the University of Chicago or in Los Alamos, understood that E equals mc squared is a symbolic phrase that can be turned into an atomic bomb. Because if you know how you integrated to the mathematical equation E equals mc squared, you can differentiate that equation back out into a manifest application, which makes a mushroom cloud on the white sands desert floor. So that long ago, men and women of wisdom understood with great respect the power of symbols, because symbols bring a condensation of integration to a point where it can be turned and applied to this world, and you can change this world. That someone who knows how to integrate to the point of realization can learn to differentiate to that degree and can make of this universe anything you want to. Because this universe is malleable. And because it is malleable, it is not simply a universe, it is a cosmos. But it is a cosmos directly in alignment with our reality. Which is why the responsibility of teaching wisdom is so precise, so exact, and a heavy burden. And perilous. And the archetypal peril is the Faustian peril. The Faustian peril that if you do not have an openness at the culmination of integration, if you close the circle goes around forever in a dull rut, gaining mechanical momentum, and finally, like a whirlpool of limitation, sucks you into it. The peril was always not to close integration, to leave the last phase open. Because when it's left open, instead of a circle, you get a slight increment and you get a spiral. And it's that spiral of integration that is the symbolic auger, which is the title of our lecture today. And that symbolic auger penetrates through this world. It makes a hole in this world. Where something that was not in this world before can come through, and something that was in this world can go out. It's a mysterious process. It's one of the most mysterious of all processes, and any real education must respect that every single student has this potential, is capable of this actuality, and should be told directly by someone who is acting as tutor, move with care at this particular juncture. When we began our education at the beginning of the year with nature, there was no particular difficulty. We can begin with nature with confidence. Because nature doesn't have any staid, cut and dried shape. We found it was a matrix of change. It was all process. Nature allows whatever is going to happen. As Walt Whitman said, Mother Nature seems to love two things best. She loves freedom and variety. That's what she likes. And so Mahapriti gives to all the existence in the universe the faculty, the ability, the privilege of freedom and variety. Infinite freedom, infinite variety. She loves that. There's no particular way of being human that she favors above others. There's no particular life form that she favors above others. Which is why Whitman entitled his essay Democratic Vistas. It was a double entendre. It was not only democratic vistas for the United States that had lost its visionary chief in the assassination of Lincoln, and there was no one else to see, only Whitman. And after stewing for 5 years, he wrote Democratic Vistas to rewrite the Declaration of Independence for a larger kind of humanity. But he also meant the democratic vistas of the universe. Integration and differentiation being a pair, they are complementarities, as Niels Bohr would say. Complementarities have a peculiar quality. When they are made manifest, when they are objectified, complementarities polarize. And that's where the dynamic tension of energy is harnessed into a dynamic. if matter could not be polarized, you wouldn't have any electromagnetic spectrum whatsoever. It's only because matter, when it is manifest, that it can be polarized, that one has such a thing as electricity, that one has such a thing as magnetism, that one has this ability, so that the objective material of the universe is here and operates courtesy of polarities. But those polarities can be transformed into complementarities so that they work together as a whole. And not only that, but that pair, that plus and minus, that's the polarity of the electromagnetic spectrum, also is paired with another pair, the magnetoelectric spectrum, at about 10 billion times the frequency of the material universe, of the electromagnetic universe. The magnetoelectric universe, at 10 billion times the frequency, also has a polarity exactly opposite to this one. So that when one looks like the wide-eyed omen seer at reality, one sees that there are a pair of pairs. There's a quaternary in polarity. And that when one polarity is brought into complementarity, the other is also. And this was what makes realization so devastatingly real. Because one doesn't just see the all that's here, one sees also exactly the all that is not here as well. If you recall, when we were dealing with nature, I introduced a poem by Wallace Stevens called The Snowman. Wallace Stevens, who was the vice president of Hartford Accident and Indemnity Insurance Company, who used to, on the commute to the office every day, in his wonderful poetic imagination, do the poem for the day. And when he got to his high-rise office in Hartford, he would dictate to his personal private executive secretary the poem of the day before he sat down to run the Hartford Insurance Company. And one of his great poems, The Snowman, which in paraphrase he says, one must be cold for a long time to look out on the winter scene in the glitter of the snow, in the shagged spruce boughs overhung with winter, to see not only the still presence of the world that is there, but to see what is not there as well. It's this quality of penetrating vision, the auger, which allows for the penetrating vision, are symbols. Symbols. Without symbols, we cannot do that. And so we're at the fourth lecture of symbols. We went through 3 months of nature, 3 months of ritual, 3 months of myth, and now we have 3 months of symbols. And this whole ecology, these four, are the ecology of integration. Nature, ritual, myth, symbol. They all belong to the same process, the same method, the same technique. It's the way in which nature comes into objectivity, happens, develops, and condenses, and disappears into what can only be called in English in our time is a space of the mind. It's like the ocean of nature has these tremendous waves and tides, and the farthest that the waves and tides of nature go is into our interior to the vanishing point of realization. Nature does not reach any farther than that. She doesn't need to. Her function is to accept integration, and nature accepts integration. She is totally democratic. And the Whitman-esque sense, she is totally democratic. She invites all who can to be and to do and to come to her. She accepts everyone, everything. And what happens after that is purely magical. That's what it was called in the ancient world, magic. We call it vision now, using the medieval Chaucerian English, because vision is more accurate for our kind of language. But it was called magic. It means that there's a second nature which comes mysteriously as the quintessence, the fifth essence, where nature has four essences. There is a fifth essence, a quintessence, a magic, a vision, which was originally in the manifestation not there. As long as manifestation was polarized, the quintessence was not there. But as soon as the quaternary of nature is achieved and the polarity is transformed into complementarity, the fifth essence comes through, and all of a sudden reality is like a hand. It has a movable, opposable thumb and is able to grasp in a way which is absolutely mystical. And the grasper, the mystical grasper, is consciousness. And consciousness can touch not only what is there, but what is not there as well, equally. When the Scottish curmudgeon physicist James Clerk Maxwell, in his Victorian milieu, worked out the equations for the theory of electricity and magnetism, he saw that the solution of the equations not only worked in the positive way for electromagnetism, but worked equally well in a negative realm that the Victorians didn't want to hear about. And so Maxwell just set that page aside. It was equally there on the desk. We have Maxwell's papers here, published at $230 a volume from Cambridge University Press. It was on his table, but because of the Victorian milieu, they didn't want to touch it. The Victorians were the last bit of a medieval feudal world. They didn't want to talk about infinity, space, void. The not talking about sexuality was a not talking about something even more perilous, and that was the exchange of cells in sexuality leads to an experience of infinity and the void at the same time, the zero and the all at the same time. To think that it was a fear about sex is very pedestrian. It was a much deeper fear, an ancient fear. It was the fear of the ego to face the real. For the ego belongs comfortably in circles that it knows, and it doesn't like to go outside of circles that it knows. And it especially doesn't want to recognize that the real has no circles at all, but ellipses and spiral augers that lead wherever you want to go. Freedom and variety, however many dimensions you'd like, there they are. You can go. Those equations are there. And in the late 20th century, they were picked up again. And they were seen. Partly due to the absolute intellectual courage of Niels Bohr, who was so welcoming of the implications of complementarity that he put the Chinese Tai Chi symbol, the Tao symbol, on the family crest of the Boers in Denmark. Because he saw that he was an interpreter, he was an augur Others had seen this, like Maxwell. Maxwell's eyes were large. His equations are exact. They still work. And the negative solutions work exactly as well as the positive ones. You can work out the mathematics of the magnetoelectric spectrum even though no one can see it. We're much too clumsy for that level of time-space. 10 billion times the frequency. That means between every proton and neutron in the nucleus of every atom, there are 10 billion spaces. That universe can pass through us like a mystical vision passes through the lines at one of the gallerias. Never touch it. The mystical world is equally as true, mathematically, as this so-called practical world of cars breaking down in grocery lines and jobs. That mystical realm is mathematically at least equal to this. So if one wants to get practical and real, you need an education that opens up everything. My friend Jacob Needleman used to say, a philosopher is somebody who's not afraid to open up the question. A real philosopher doesn't necessarily know, but has the guts. He was from the tough section of Philadelphia as a boy. The real philosopher, the lover of wisdom, has the guts to open up the question. Let's find out what it is that we're trying to find out, what we're looking at. So that differentiation, and let's put it this way, differentiation must be in a complementarity to integration. It's a universal principle. It's not only universal for the universe that's here, but it's universe for the real, the universe that is not here and yet has its way as well. And understanding this, one also understands a corollary principle. However integration happens, by whatever technique, method, range, pitch, content, purpose, that integration happens, the differentiation will be expressible. We'll have a vision, we'll have a creation, we'll have an ordinal quality exactly in complement to it. The simple way of saying it is this. You will get out of the oven what the recipe has called for in your baking. You can't have a recipe for chocolate cake that doesn't include the ingredients of chocolate cake. If you substitute mud for flour, you're not going to have chocolate cake. You're going to have mud pie, literally. So the place to take care is not in crossing your fingers and wishing and hoping for a better universe, a better kind of person, a better kind of world. But on the level where it can be done in the integral process. So that nature is important, rituals are important, myths are important, symbols are important, not because they are the catch-all, but because they are the recipe for what comes out later. And what comes out later comes as a gift. Men and women of experience and vision have always known that life on that dimension is a gift, absolute gift. There's no way that you could expect it, that you deserve it, or don't deserve it. It's a gift. Consciousness is a gift. Carl Jung, on the lintel over his entrance, the stone entrance to his garden, had the phrase, called or not called, God is there. Doesn't matter whether the priests are good or not, or whether there are priests or not. God is not an epiphenomenon dependent upon getting it right with the right kind of people. That's not how it works. we found that in the second part of our education in ritual, after 3 months of nature, we did 3 months of ritual. And we found that ritual is essentially what we do. But even more profoundly, it's exactly, in a mindful way, it's what we do. Not what we're hoping we're doing, not what we think we're doing, not what we expect will be interpreted that we're doing. What we do. Unerring accuracy. There are meditations. There are powerful meditations by this time in the evolution of life and consciousness on this planet that are able to grind so fine that one can come to whatever exactness one needs to in terms of perception. We have mechanical scientific sensors now that can detect one photon, one neutrino. I remember one time, just to give you an example, little wisdom story. True. One time, 25 years ago, struggling with certain kinds of quandaries that came out of being tear gassed one time too many in Berkeley. Went up to the Sierras above Lake Tahoe, way up above Heavenly Valley, the high Sierras, and thinking that there was some capacity that I had probably lost, some fine edge in meditation I'd probably lost, couldn't see accurately. And I was carrying a rucksack, and I came to this little dip in the land, and there were some dogwood trees growing there with the kind of chartreuse shade that they make, and a big granite boulder. And I came to the decision, it's going to be there. I'm going to sit there and bring it out, whatever it is. If I don't have the capacity anymore, I will know that. And sat down with that kind of enormous, almost like a titanic resolve. And as I did, one of the little things in the rucksack fell off. It spun off to the side. It was a little can of juice. It just spun off. And out of the side of the eye, there was a glint of sunlight off the top of the can as it spun off. It sat there on the rock, energized into a full lotus. And as soon as that calmed down like that, in the mind, floating up, this little oval, just like when in the 1940s they used to have in some restaurants these little divination things where you would turn this little ball upside down and inside was a little black piece of dice that had little phrases on it. Came floating up just like that, and it said in nice blue script against silvery gray, sun-kissed. Yes, with all the stylized sun-kissed. And for a split second I thought, what the hell? Came out of this samadhi, grabbed that damn little can and looked at it, and there it was, sun-kissed. You can have powers of meditation that can resolve a brand name out of a glint of sunlight off the corner of your eye. We don't have any problem with that. That is given to us as a gift of life. That's part of our reality. But what is almost impossible is to apply that to this world. This world is really stupid, crazy, chaotic, mean, vicious, and it has only one saving grace, that it's not real. It's only provisionally that. We can change every single list on those ingredients. We can make this world as beautiful as Walt Disney's greatest fantasy. Why? Because Mother Nature loves freedom and variety, and she's all for whatever can be done. And if we want to make a beautiful world, she will let us. There's not a single obstacle in our way. except understanding that there needs to be a pretty sizable population of people who are self-realized. Well, I don't mean Yogananda, with all apologies. I mean on level where 10 billion times frequency is at home as 100-watt light bulb. But it takes an education. It takes an education to be able to bring all of that into process, and it takes a while. Now, somebody in the future is going to for sure cut the time down. The best I can do is 2 years. I can't do it any less than 2 years. I have tried for 30 years. I can't cut it down more than that. So it takes me that. I'm a Model T of what in the future is probably going to be a fast jet car. God love him. However, our integration is, the differentiation is going to read out that way. So the care must be taken here in integration. And the cincher, the place where we either tie a knot or a bow, is at the end of the symbols section, at the end of these 3 months. And the way to tie a knot is to think that you got somewhere. Because the only creature that occupies that somewhere is a devolving ego. Can be disguised as superhuman, fabulous, universal cosmic raconteur. It's a phony. One little wisdom story, then we'll take a break. Manly Hall, once with a glint in his Irish, lovable eyes, said one of the greatest experiences in his life was going to Japan, to Mount Hiei, where Kobodaishi had built a temple to the real God at the top of this hill, reached by countless steps that go up. Kobodaishi had gotten the realization from Kukai, who had gotten it by going over to Japan in the Tang Dynasty and seeing a universal wisdom statement on a stela there in old Chang'an. Tang Taizong had this 12-foot stela with these words carved on it, raised in the capital courtyard of the capital city of Chang'an in the Tang Dynasty. And what it was a statement of mystical, Jewish, Nestorian, Christian Taoism. Yeah. And Kobodaishi had passed it on by building this special temple to the real God. And Manly said, despite his girth and weight, this is 1923, he was just 22 years old, but he was already 350 pounds, 6'4.5", like a refrigerator-sized John Wayne. He got all the way up to the top. And when you got up to the top, you had to go down this earthen embankment underneath, and there in the temple, he said he found the real God. The place was absolutely empty. It was vacant. There was nothing there, and he was so happy that Kobodaishi had got it right. Let's take a break. Let's put this into an interesting kind of emotion. Let's use this kind of language, and notice now that we're using language. Symbols integrate by interiorizing meaning through language. Symbols integrate by interiorizing meaning through language. Now let's plug this into the educational cycle. Let's see where this fits. Notice that I have to use a phrase that an American Gandhian once used as the title of his book. We have a compass for civilization. This education is like a compass for civilization. You have cardinal points, east, south, north, west, and you can turn the compass over, and it has the ability to direct itself also in the magical realm of consciousness. So we have a compass for civilization. This education is not only a track that one goes through, however long, boring, laborious, however quick, fascinating, magical. Some of you know who have gone through this, 3 months goes by like nothing. I've been doing it since 1965, and believe me, I can hardly believe that we're already in the 43rd lecture of the first year. Compass for Civilization. There are little mnemonic keys that are easy to understand. The first place where existence happens is not in nature, but in ritual. In what we do, our doing objectifies and makes existence. So the importance of the ritual level of life is that it posits existence. If you look for existence in nature, you're going to eventually fantasize because you cannot find it there. Nature does not exist. It doesn't mean that it's non-existent at all. It means that nature occurs in a way that is like before whatever we are could determine existence. We have no criteria initially to determine the reality of nature. It just simply is there. If you look at the first book on geometry, written 2,300 years ago in Alexandria, Euclid's Elements, 2,300 years ago, the first textbook on geometry begins with the phrase, "A point is a locus of no dimension." And when that locus of no dimension moves, it can then be said to describe a line. A line is not something drawn between 2 points. When a point, which is a locus of no dimension, moves, that's a line. And once there is a line, the line occurs reverberantly in a plane. So that when nothing, not nothing, a locus of no dimension moves, you have a line, and that line generates a plane. Now that's geometry 2,300 years ago. And geometry is really a science. You can build buildings with geometry. A civil engineer can take versions of geometry and make fantastic highway bridges. There's nothing nonsensical about it. There's nothing whatsoever other than exactness. So it's important for us to understand here, existence actually is determined by what we do. That's why the foundation of any ethic is always, what are you doing? We used at that time in the ritual course one of the short little sermons of the Buddha called the Satipatthana Sutra, the Mindfulness Sutra, where when one is really mindful of exactly what you're doing, it creates a quality of sobering up. Sobering up in the sense that one begins to notice that if you do this, the book is picked up. And on that ABC fundamental plane level, you can begin to do actions that you really intend to do, that you align your purpose, that you sit when you sit, that you stand when you stand, you walk when you walk. And that mindfulness begins to have an effect, a resonance. Its resonance is that, like any yoga, when you organize any particular function, that organized function magnetically organizes all of the other functions progressively. That's the whole principle of a yoga. If you modulate your breathing, just that handle helps you modulate the entire physiology, which is very complex, of a human body. If there's the yoga of the little fingers, just maintaining that yoga perfectly, one can organize the entire body. It's, to use a Zane Grey Western term out of the United States, it's called the tether. The way you train a wild horse is you put a single rope on the horse and tie one end of the rope to a stake. And you let a day go by. Because with a tether, with a single lead, with a single rope, the ancient Sanskrit term sutra meant thread. The sutra is the rope by which you tether the mind. The mind's like a wild horse. Because eventually, in all the permutations of its chaotic wildness and movement, it begins to learn that the circumference of its wildness is determined by the tether. Can move any which way, but the sum total of all of its movements is finally this kind of sphere. And what a yoga is for is to tether the mind so it begins to learn that it has a sphere. Without the tether, it never knows that. And then, of course, it has to unlearn that by realizing that if you change the tether, you change the sphere. And you can have an infinite number of tethers and even the possibility of having, finally, a no-tether mind. Wu-wei. A no-tether mind of complete freedom and enlightenment. Well, then its sphere is, there's no even word for that. But the first step is to use a provisional tether to demonstrate to itself that it has possibility of form in relationship to the tether or the sutra or whatever. And so on the ritual level, rituals were the tether that men and women used in the past and in the present and in the future. What we do are the tethers. It's like the sphere of our karma is determined by what we do, by those tethers. And you can change it by changing what it is that you're doing. And the beautiful thing is that one can change instantly. Now, it's culturally very difficult for us to change instantly. We're like great big, huge, clumsy C-5 freight planes. We have to turn, take several years sometimes to make a turn and come back. But there's no resistance in the universe whatsoever to make an instantaneous change. This is the whole thing behind the Zen laughter. You don't have to wait even 1 nanosecond longer. You can end that karma permanently by doing something else consistently. That's freedom. That's liberty. Knowing that that's true. Is it true? Absolutely. Absolutely? Yeah. So we found that if we look for existence in nature, we're always going to be disappointed. We're always going to fill in. We're going to project. We're going to compensate. But if we accept nature as a matrix of change and see that the objectivity which we need to have a basis, a foundation, is in ritual, in what we do, then existence comes into play there. And because existence is there in ritual, because it is there in ritual, something follows that. It's as simple as walking on the earth, and as you walk on the earth, walk on the plane of existence, you kick up a little dust. Experience is that dust that's kicked up by the movement of existence. And an integral quality of experience is language. Language literally flames into being because something has been done by someone. And because there's someone else to tell about it. It's a peculiar thing. It's very peculiar. One of the archetypes that males used to have in antiquity, and isn't there so much anymore, but versions of it are there, is that at a certain age, usually about what we call now the 6th grade, boys like to go and have adventures, primarily not for the adventure, but in order to have stories to tell to others who didn't have that adventure. I remember living on the Gulf Coast of Texas, Corpus Christi, in the 6th grade. And we were trying to read Homer and to build a little bit of a raft boat to go out into the Gulf of Mexico. Of course, it's just Corpus Christi Harbor, but to us, going out to have adventures, because there were a lot of other guys that never did these kinds of things. We could tell them stories. Oh man, we went way out there. We were heading out past Padre Island into the Gulf. Well, where were you going? Well, we're going to go to Veracruz. Who knows? Caracas. You guys were sitting around, worrying. Adventures. Language is this cloud of experience that is there as a concomitant, as a resonance to existence. Existence has a resonance, which is experience, and myth. That's the realm of myth. And myth, language, experience, that realm is like an ocean also, just like nature. So in a way, existence, our actions, are on an interface between two oceans, an ocean of experience and an ocean of nature. And wherever they interface, however they interface, that is objectively manifest. That really happens. So mysterious was this that this particular quality, this objectivity, was the arcane basis upon which the early Egyptian religion was founded. Ra rises each day, and whatever he does on that day is real forever. The Egyptian understanding 5,000 years ago, it's there in the pyramid text, is that when Ra rises, this new day, the sun being presented by the scarab, will be real forever. That day joins all the days that have been made real by Ra rising then. And there are so many days that he is Lord of millions of years. And Ra will rise tomorrow again. And if we align ourselves with the rituals that make the existence of Ra real, which are indexed by the language, the sacred language, then we will rise with Ra every day, forever. And this is our resurrection immortality. That was the ancient understanding. That in between the ocean of language and the ocean of nature, what is done is real, and we can bring what we have done into an infinity, an eternity of occurrence. But just as language can align itself with nature and make that interface, language itself is an interface in between the objectivity of what we do and the objectivity of the mind, what we think. Because language all by itself has a quality of creating meaning, which is the interior world. And what we do in the exterior world in ritual is paralleled by what is thought in the interior world, so that symbols are also objectively real. Symbols are objective, just like actions are objective. So that ritual and symbol go together. They're like a tuning fork. Just as nature and language go together, another tuning fork. And these two pairs form a quaternary, like a square, a grand square. A grand square which is also at the same time a cycle. And if the cycle is handled right, the cycle reignites itself through the liberty and space of never being closed off. It's like when the Navajo weaves his Yebiche rug, he always leaves one thread, not a part of the design, that runs off the border. It's called the spirit trail. This is the guarantee that this spiritual form is open. Or the Hopi version of it is that when a human being is born, baby is born, the entire human form is there except for the soft spot at the top of the cranium. Because it's through this soft spot that the words of praise go out of our form, through that openness to the grandfather, the grandmother spirit. And that the whole purpose of a mature process is to keep that open in a human being, not to close it off. Like General Custer, completely closed off. And Crazy Horse, because he was completely open all the time, was never wounded in battle, even though he was in the front lines forever. Never wounded. This quality of keeping the circle open, keeping the ecology of integration open, in ancient tradition was always phrased in some manner similar to this, that the final step of integration is acceptance. It's not anything that you can further do. It's that you stop then doing and let it be. Remember the George Harrison song, Let It Be? Just let it be. Acceptance. And acceptance, because it is objectively real, because it's an inner quality. Ritual is existence. Language, myth is experience. But symbols are essence. And the essences are as real as the existence. Essence and existence are objectively real. And when one lets acceptance be interiorly, it is objectively real. And it works. Acceptance in its objective reality works in a way in which acceptance will always work. What is the resonance of acceptance? Its resonance is absorption. Absorption is the resonance of acceptance. And so our spiritual interior remains an open form because we let acceptance be as the final stage of integration. And the error, the mistake, wrong, sort of a Dennis Hopper in Apocalypse Now. Wrong, man, wrong. The mistake, the error, is to try and finish it by some clever ploy. To think that there's some occult thing that you're going to do that nobody else knows. That's the black magic. of thinking that there's something you, in some secret, clever way, know that nobody else knows. This is the Faustian lure, right? What's the real secret? It's like Simon Magus coming up to St. Peter and saying, well, what is it? What is this final secret? Pay you anything, man. And St. John, who was only about 19 at the time, said it's nothing. And St. Peter clapped a hand over him. And St. John gave Simon Magus the key, but he didn't hear it. He thought he said nothing. He did say nothing, because it's nothing. That is the secret. It's like going into the temple of Kobodaishi and finding it empty. It's a relief that at this stage, you put it all down and you do nothing. Acceptance, whatever it is. Whatever it is. Because the step through realization is effortless. You don't even take the step. You don't have to take a step. Because there's no resistance. There's no place to step. So this quality is what we're coming to. We're coming to this threshold. This threshold, and one of the ways of understanding it, like the ancient Egyptian Hermetic tradition, was to rise with Ra so that that day becomes real. And that day, you can imagine it as like a cube of time-space which joins all the other cubes of time-space for 1,000,000 years. And will go on indefinitely. Is boundless. Ra can rise each day forever. In the Egyptian understanding of that geometry, they had only one guaranteed, 5,000 years ago, only one guaranteed mathematical method available to them, because math was very primitive at that time. They could find 2/3 of any number. Now, it sounds very peculiar. It sounds absolutely astonishing. Well, what the hell is that? They can find 2/3 of any number. They knew that if they could be aware of 2/3, that Ra would provide the missing third. And so the whole idea of the esoteric trinity, the triune, the triangle, the thrice greatest, was that we provide 2 of the 3, and Ra, God, provides the third. What do we provide? We provide the right actions and the right thoughts. We provide 2 of the 3. And what does Ra provide? He provides a third objective reality. What is that third objective reality? We'll come to it next year. And that is the eternal person is also objectively real. I recently saw a book by a physicist about the mathematics of resurrection, and I looked through the whole thing, and he didn't understand anything. Just sophomoric arrogance of thinking that had something to say. Didn't understand anything at all. Why is it esoteric? It's esoteric because it's not exoterically there. We don't provide all 3. We provide 2. If our ritual objectivity is in resonance with our mental open space objectivity, then that spiritual person objectively will be there as a gift. That's part of the wisdom. But in between, just like in between ritual and symbol, there was this realm of language, mythic language. In between the objective spiritual person and the symbolic mind is another sphere, another ocean of language, magic language. So that the deep self soul is like an island of objective reality in between two oceans of language, one mythic language and one magic language. And there's a great difference between them. But this island where the deep self-soul, where the mind is, has no there-ness. Yet operatively it occurs. And so the word that's been made popular in our time is archetype. Archetype. And so in the outline of our 2-year course, on page 16, there are a few paragraphs like this, written years ago, germane to what we're talking about here. The shape of the human personality is therefore not a form, but a presence, conscious in thought and feeling abiding. So it is rather a focus of meaning, of developmental forces, a barycenter of psychic energy. The archetype of this new generative shape is the spiral spirit, visualized most commonly now, but still profoundly new, as the whirling galaxy, the Milky Way visualized whole. But this archetype must remain in the background where it belongs. As a context overall, it is a health-bestowing symbol of the self. It belongs to the self. It does not belong in the ego, in the conscious personality. That personality must be so expressed that the archetype shines through. The ego must not be opaque to those symbolic energies and meanings, but still proportionate to the real. The archetypal symbol of self is a true context and center of life, not the protagonist of that life itself. That protagonist is you and me and the others that we live with here. It becomes mysterious very quickly when one condenses it and puts it into this kind of language. Right away there are problematics, right away there are debatables, right away there are ifs, plus the ands and buts. All of that kind of language is just there in reserve. We don't need to go to it very often at all. What is here for us is the ongoing process of the material that we're working with. And because the crunch comes so basically for us, the crunch is that space of realization in between two oceans of language is a real problem for us. There are times in the cycles of human life where men and women don't have a problem here. Their problem is somewhere else in this cycle. We don't have any problem elsewhere. Our problem is right there in between, in the interface between these two oceans of language. Because they are so confused in this time, almost no one can tell the difference at all. No one can tell the difference between a story and the storyteller. And if you can't do that, well, it's like in Jakarta. That's the Wayang's business, is to show you the shadows and tell the stories. And for you to go through this all night if need be, until you finally tire of the story with the shadows. And you come around and look at the storyteller, and then you're able to go to sleep. And you can see that behind the story and the shadows is always a storyteller. And that storyteller is radically different from the story. Radically different. And so we need to come around on the other side of the screen, the other side of the mirror coating that the ego says is the mind, and see the storyteller. I'm allergic to that too. So part of the method that we use are books, because books have this quality. The books that we use and deal with have this quality. They participate somewhat in both realms, in the mythic realm and the magic realm. And if we just used books, like an A book, there are all kinds of perils and traps that come with that now. Every tool has its little corollary of glitches. It's like there's always a bug list that goes with any computer program. Any program always has a bug list, and the more complex the program, the longer the bug list. When you get a computer able to do a trillion bits, flops, the floating operation points, the bug list is almost indefinite. So one of the problems was that as soon as we got to the sophistication of being able to use the book in a conscientious way, the bug list of using the book became so formidable that it took almost a lifetime to master that. When did this happen? This happened to the extent that it did about 400 years ago. Men and women were sophisticated enough in dimensions of consciousness about 400 years ago that the book, which had been for 1600 years a traditional wisdom learning tool, became more problematic than useful. There were two geniuses that lived right at that time who took this problem of the book on squarely and met it with fantastic genius. The two were Cervantes in Spain and Shakespeare in England. Cervantes wrote a book which was paradoxically self-conscious of its own happenings, Don Quixote. And Shakespeare turned the book into a ritual cosmos called the play. The play is not in the transcript. It's on the stage. You have to be able to lift that language off the page into this doability. The actor is a sacred hierophant who is able to take a magic language which is always written and bring it into play in a ritual way in existence so that the audience has an experience based on existence. Rather than the other way, an experience that comes down from some kind of written, powerful code. Because no matter what you do, a language that moves from written to experience always is a debasing, legalistic, mechanical, authoritarian direction. It says here is the first word in your execution. It says that you're guilty. You've infracted this. So that the whole process of integration cannot happen that way. It's like the hook that's very useful as a tool when used in the right way, but if used in the wrong way, will hook you. When language moves the other way, when it comes from magic down to experience, it's too powerful for experience to handle. And we become automatized. We become victims of a usurping order that's much more powerful than even our own selves. And so, as Shakespeare said, very easily, the play's the thing. Because when language experience comes out of existence, it has a wholesome quality which we can interiorize, and then we can focus it. And when we do that, then we find ourselves. Then realization is possible. And when realization is possible in ourselves, we can come to magic language by our own gift of life, not by someone else's authority. So this is a very interesting and precarious kind of a process. We need a couple of phrases, not as rules or laws, but as guiding indicators. Here are two of them. Integration produces awareness. Differentiation is consciousness. The symbol for awareness traditionally was water. The symbol for consciousness traditionally was fire. It's like Simon Magus. He knew about baptism because it was an ancient process. The cleansing by water, which even metaphorically, the cleansing by psychic water, which are dreams. He knew that. But he didn't know the secret, the real esoteric thing that Jesus taught. What did he teach? He taught baptism by fire. Those baptized by water can live in this world, but those baptized by fire can live in eternity. Consciousness. Simon Marcus wanted to pay for. Well, how do you do this? No one else can do that for you. If you don't actually do it, it doesn't get done for you. And instead of ending up with realization, you end up with ideologies. Whether they're theological or political or even economic or sociological, it makes no difference really. Those are just different colors for handcuffs. Doesn't make any difference what color the handcuffs are. So that the process that we're coming up to at the end of symbols, that process is wonderful and yet precarious. And so my function as a friend along the way, as a companion, a real tutor as a companion, my whole function is to keep the precision there until right at the very end, I withdraw. I get out of your way. And so just as we've been doing, because we've set this up, we take 12 Saturdays in a row till that row curves itself around. And those 12 come to some sort of a focus. And then the 13th, we take a book which is completely outside of the paired quality that we have. Instead of taking one book, we learned that the method by which we can get out of the problematical authority of books is to use pairs of books, pairs of texts. The genius originally behind this was Plutarch. Plutarch was a great master of mystery initiations in the first century of the Common Era, 1st century AD. He found that in order to understand a form like a human life was such a complex form that you had to have a background equally complex in order to show the definition, the scintillating jewel-like complication of a life, and the only background sufficiently complicated to show the complicated form of life was another life. And so he had parallel lives, so that you see one life in terms of the other. So that there's a complementarity in parallel lives. It was a fantastic discovery. It was a shared present secret that Plutarch was really the designer of. So we use pairs of books, like Parallel Lives, to show one to the other. And what we're showing now, what we're using here to begin with symbols, is Faulkner's As I Lay Dying and Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. stream of consciousness, awareness, one by a woman, one by a man, and we're using them vis-a-vis so that we can understand that there is something here in this pair of texts that can move us a step forward. And the next pair that we're going to have is also one book by a woman, one book by a man. The book by a man is by William Blake, because we needed a man of symbolic sensitivity that was almost ineffable, and Blake is one of those men. Blake will do. William Blake will do. And as a paired complement to him, we're using Suzanne Langer, her book Philosophy in a New Key. Suzanne Langer, whose teachers were Alfred North Whitehead and Ernst Cassirer. We've already used Cassirer's myth and language. And you could see in 100 pages how fine Cassirer could grind. Philosophy in a New Key and William Blake's Book of Job. Now what's interesting about Blake as a male doing his book is that his book puts the language into 22 images, 22 symbolic pictures. 22 symbolic pictures. Where have you heard that before? Where are there 22 symbolic pictures? The major arcana of the tarot deck. To save a lot of time, Manly Hall put the major arcana of the tarot deck. He directed Augustus Knapp to illustrate it so that all 21 of the numbered cards are a series of cardinal lines put into a magic cube ordinal matrix against the Fool card, which is 0. And when you see it that way, then you can understand the ancient Hermetic tarot. This has nothing to do with most of the books on the tarot that are out. Those are written by people who learned tarot from reading other people's books on the tarot. It's good for making money, but it doesn't do anything. I learned tarot from my spirit mother, and she learned it from the Gitano tradition of the gypsies in southern Spain and France. When you learn it that way, you understand that the 22 arranged in a transformational way, so that you have 1, 2, 3 sets of 7, 3 cardinal sets arranged in a cubic order that goes in the context of a 0, which is equally complex to that whole ordinal arrangement of the other 21. The basic archetype of that major arcana of the tarot was the transformational geography of the floor of the Gothic cathedral. Because once upon a time, there were construction men and women, not just the esoteric architects, but the people who built the stuff, who knew that the floor of the Gothic cathedral has 22 parts, and the 22nd part is the altar place, the 0 place, the 0 point, where the transformation of acceptance happens. And when one understands that, one can see that Blake's Book of Job, the illustrations of the Book of Job, shows that Blake understood this very, very, very deep, truly Kabbalistic transformational matrix of the 22. But interestingly enough, in her own way, Suzanne Langer, Philosophy in a New Key, also understood it. She was really something. If you want to find a world-class American woman philosopher, Suzanne Langer will do. She's as precise a mind as Immanuel Kant. She understood that there's no way that you can wake up from the story that you're locked into unless you can go to a higher order, an indexing power, like in music, a new key. Because if you go into a new key, you get to see what the key was this place in an octave. And there are lots of octaves. How many octaves are there in the cosmos? How many musical scales are there? You can look it up in Grove's Encyclopedia of Music. There are an infinite number of musical scales available to man. We can sing in modes that have never been imagined, even by aliens in the farthest UFO you can possibly desire. We could sing beautiful songs. And you know, God would hum with us if we did that. More next week. Thank you.